Hello my dear friends, you are in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of August of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. You know that today, the 21st of August, was a very interesting day. And that day was very interesting not because of that fact that some Russian sources reported that they managed to capture established control over Sinkovka on the Kupiansk front line, not because of some tank penetration of the Ukrainian defense belt, not because of many other updates like involving in the conflict in the last Ukrainian strategical reserves. I have analyzed the entire updates that we got today, and I realized and I understood that the Russians have launched something. For now, it's very difficult to understand what exactly the Russians have launched, but according to my feeling, according to the data we received, the Russians have launched the disinformational operation. So basically today, during the previous week, during this week, those days, we received significant number of updates. Completely all of them were fake and some kind of speculation. And today we will discuss them in details, and we will try to understand what exactly the Russians are planning to do and what is their goals and their purposes. And of course, the first speculation, maybe this is not speculation, but when talking about narrative, the first important updates are coming, of course, from Zaporozhye, from Robotyne frontline, and a lot of Russian sources, a lot of Russian military reporters on the ground started reporting at the same thing, that Ukrainians launch their final wave in direction of Robotyne, that Ukrainians start using their last and final strategical reserves in face of 82nd Brigade. The Ukrainians, this one, 82nd Air Assault Brigade. The Ukrainians are about to lose the entire army, are about to finish their manpower. The Ukrainians soon will lose this special military operation in the Battle of Robotyne. The Russians just need to wait another day and everything will be finished. So this is the entire narrative and let's say the atmosphere of the Battle of Robotyne from the Russian side. Of course, these updates, the Russians are not the only one who read these updates. We see that almost every single person in the world have some subscriptions on the Russian Telegram channels, Russian resources, and everybody see and understand these updates and this piece of information. When talking about the global scope of Robotyne, the Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 80 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles and 5 artillery systems. The Ukrainians continued their offensive operation in Robotyne. The Ukrainians managed to redeploy and to get a lot of armored vehicles inside the settlement. Basically, the Russians control currently just the eastern, western and the southern part of the settlement. The Ukrainians tried to attack this area using 3 rows, on the western one, the central direction, and of course the eastern direction. The Ukrainians are trying to clear every single building. Now they have not just infantry, but also the Ukrainians have significant number of armored vehicles inside of the settlement. For example, this video was published by the Ukrainian forces. On this video we see how the Bradleys were attacking and the Russian buildings. Probably they was just trying to pin down the Russian positions, or at least that was like security measurements just to make sure that there are no Russians in those buildings. But the most important part from this video is at least two things that are very important from this video. The first one is that the Ukrainians have already got the edge of the settlement, and basically they have already forced the Russians to almost to withdraw their positions in this area. The second important thing is that Ukrainians have possibilities to use armored vehicles inside the settlement. Now there are not just infantry but a lot of armored vehicles. We are waiting for the tanks, whether the Ukrainians of course are planning to move tanks there. So this video was geolocated in this area, and basically the Russians have left the central, almost the central and the northern part of the settlement. So there was a video how the armored vehicle was moving along the street and was attacking the Russian positions on the south, somewhere in this area, just to pin down and probably to secure the movement for the next waves of the Ukrainian forces. Also, the Russians published the video how they were bombing the Ukrainian positions in the central part. As you can see, we see the infantry running from one building building to another. The Russians try to control and to follow the situation with drones, with some eye positions, and after they see accumulation of Ukrainian forces indeed in this or that building, the Russians make a strike. And the same street, but the building a little bit to the north, another movement, another redeployment of Ukrainian infantry between the buildings. The Russians control the situation, and after that the Russians start bombing and shelling the buildings. As a result of one of those strikes, almost the entire building or two buildings were reduced to ruins. Also, we have so the Ukrainians moves, and step by step they're clearing the situation. Of course, still we can't say that the entire settlement is in the Ukrainian control. The Russians probably controls the most important parts, but anyway, we see the progress and we see the entire process. Furthermore, the Ukrainians try to hold their positions on the eastern flank of Robotyne in this area, trying not to allow the Russians to counterattack Ukrainian positions in their flanks. The Russians, at least for now, don't have such possibilities to counterattack. The only thing the Russians can do is to make drone strikes, and today we got another series of videos of drone strikes in this area, and the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian soldiers in the trenches, and those soldiers who tried to keep and to secure the Ukrainians' flanks while the main forces are trying to storm Robotyne. So basically this is the current situation. On this video we see another attempt of the Ukrainian forces to develop a little bit their bridgehead in the vicinity of Verbova, but as a result of artillery strikes, drone strikes, the Ukrainians lost another portion, another squad of armored vehicles like Leopard, another striker, two pieces of strikers at least, and so on. And the Russians continue bombing and shelling the trenches in this area, trying to reduce as much as possible the Ukrainian manpower. In this video we see the usage probably of TOS flamethrower systems, the best weapon against infantry. Probably the cluster rounds is better, but cluster rounds is legal, and TOS flamethrower system is a legal weapon, at least on this front line. So we see this situation. Furthermore, the Russians reported about attacks against the Ukrainian positions in Mala Takmachka. And today, for example, the Minister of Defense, the Vice Minister of Defense of Ukraine, reported that after the Western countries published updates regarding the involvement of 82nd MAC Air Assault Brigade on the combat line in the vicinity of Robotyne, the Russians made at least 5 artillery and aircraft strikes against their positions, 5, and basically we see how the Western countries helped the Russians. They provided them just the secret information regarding the dispositions probably or relocation of Ukrainian air assault brigade, and as a result of that situation the Russians made a strike, and probably the Ukrainians had some losses as a result of those attacks. So this is the situation, and this is how the Western countries can help the Ukrainians when it's not necessary. Now we are moving further to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. When talking about this area, we haven't received even a single update from the Ukrainian side. Mainly we got updates just from the Russian forces, just Russian side. The Russians continue bombing and shelling Staromayorsk and Makarovka with the purpose to slow down the Ukrainians, not to allow them to accumulate their forces. The most important, not to allow them to regroup and to dig in deeper in Staromayorsk and Urozhaine. As a result of bombings, artillery strikes and clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost around 110 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. And now we have just finished with Zaporozhye and with South Donetsk area. And one more time I will try to prolong and to continue with the update with the beginning what we started this area with. We were talking that according to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians launched their last attack, their last wave, they're using their strategical reserves and so on. And basically this is informational military campaign at this stage of special military operation. And this campaign military, this informational game is not the final one, the last one, at least during these days. Now we are moving to the Donetsk area, and probably during the previous weekend we have already discussed this in the morning video, that according to some sources the Russians, as a result of offensive operation somewhere between Novobakhmutovka and Krasnogorovka, managed to develop their bridgehead and to capture a few strongholds in the vicinity of Keramik and Novokalinova. Yet we haven't received even a single video or photo confirmation from the Russian forces regarding this attack. But anyway, as I understand, based on the entire global situation on the combat lines, I believe that this is another disinformational campaign, military campaign from the Russian forces. Now, for now, maybe you don't understand the real picture, but in the end of the video, we will understand everything what I'm trying to tell you. When talking about Bakhmut and Artyomovsk, then the entire Donetsk front line, the Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost another 225 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. If you remember, during the previous days, the Ukrainians made lots of attempts to attack the settlement by the name of Andreevka, and they have almost managed to penetrate the area and to capture and circle this small settlement. Then the Russians launched counterattack, and as a result of helicopter strikes, artillery strikes, tank attacks, the Ukrainian forces were defeated, completely collapsed, and were forced to step back. After that, the Russians launched their own counteroffensive operation on the north, but in this case, the Russians were defeated and lost around from 3 to 6 armored vehicles. Also, some events took place in the vicinity of Berkhovka-Yagidne. The Ukrainians probably made a small reconnaissance in combat in this area, but the Russians discovered the Ukrainian positions during the night period of time, and after that the Russians started bombing and shelling these railways and the accumulation of Ukrainian commandos or reconnaissance squad, without any changes on the ground, of course. Now we are moving to salient, to the Tarskoye salient, and today we got a very important video from this area. The video from Tarskoye salient that was geolocated by the Russian sources. On this video we see how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions, and now we see the arrivals of the missiles on the ground. Just in a second, this one. And this area is geolocated. This is the fresh video. These events took place somewhere from 20th to 21st of August, or yesterday or today. And according to this video, the Russians were attacking this area. If you remember, when we started just talking about Tarskoye salient, we saw the video how the Ukrainians were bombing some positions in this area, and we considered that attack of Ukrainian forces as the fact that the Russians managed to capture this part of Tarskoye. But today we see completely opposite picture, how the Russians were attacking these positions with artillery systems, which confirms that probably either the Russians haven't established control over this territory 2 months ago, or the Ukrainians managed to recapture these positions as a result of counteroffensive operation. We're using this video just for geolocation purposes to understand the positions of the Russians and the Ukrainians in this area. And also the Ukrainians published the video how they managed to discover and to destroy the Russian Tulpin artillery system, very heavy artillery system. As a result of a strike, that artillery system was destroyed. The Russians were using this artillery system to attack the Ukrainian positions in Tarskoye, in Serebryanka. The main purpose of this artillery system is to destroy and reduce the Ukrainian strongholds. Now we are moving to probably the most important front line of today. We are going to talk about the Kupiansk area. And one more time, let's start from the beginning. Today we got updates regarding the strategical reserves. Today we got updates on this week. We got update regarding some progress in the vicinity of Donetsk. And today we got updates from the Russian sources that they managed to capture Sinkovka. And I have already updated the map regarding that piece of news, and some Russian sources even published the video saying that this video was made in this area. But in my Telegram channel I told you that I have some I'm not sure that the video was made in the settlement, because on this video we see that the car goes along the streets and there are buildings on two sides of the streets. And I mentioned that in this village there are no such streets where we can find buildings on both sides. So that's why I thought that was a speculation, but I expected who is going to be first who will geolocate this video. And after a few hours, when this video was published, some Russian sources geolocated this video in Vorovskoye, Voronove, and the south of Severodonetsk. Anyway, today we got a very important update, and most of the Russian reliable sources with around 1 million subscribers confirmed, saying that the Russians captured Sinkovka, showing, and everybody were showing the same video. But later we realized that the Russians maybe force the Ukrainians to step back from the settlement, maybe have entered the northern part, but it's too early to talk about the establishing control over the entire city. So that was another speculation, another disinformation that we got during the day. And the most important, that the Russians were talking about the Sinkovka. At the same time, they published, the same sources were publishing the video of destroyed bridges in Kupiansk. So they're like saying that the Russians captured the settlement from one side and destroyed the bridges from another. Currently, there is like operational encirclement and the Ukrainians don't have place to run away. So there was a real disinformation regarding Kupiansk. Furthermore, at the same time when the Russians start talking about Sinkovka and Kupiansk, some other Russian sources started publishing about some penetration operation in the vicinity of Kotlarovka, Kislovka, and that the Russians using armored fist managed to penetrate the Ukrainians' defense orders and to get as deep as possible in direction of Pishan. At some point, the Russians split their forces in two parts. Another part started movements in direction of Petropavlovka. So the massive disinformation. And there was, since the beginning of the special military operation, there were just few days or few weeks when we saw the same level of disinformation from the Russian side. I'm not saying that like updates regarding the situation with strategical reserves in Robotyne is fake. I'm not saying that the piece of information regarding the progress in Donetsk is fake. I'm not saying that the situation with Sinkovka is fake, because later some Russian sources did confirm that probably the Ukrainians left the settlement, the Russians entered the northern part, and currently they try to clear and to dig in deeper in the southern part. Probably this information regarding the tank penetration along the railways in direction of Pishan is also correct, but we can't confirm it, and we see that there is a real purposes of all these pieces of disinformations. And another and probably the most important update we got regarding Kharkiv area. If you remember, a few days ago we got a piece of information that Ukrainians announced evacuation on the North Kharkiv region, but yet we haven't received a real official announcement of that process. Yet we haven't received even a single confirmation from the ground regarding this evacuation. So probably another disinformation from the Russian side. So now the question: what is the purpose of all these events, of all these this very big and powerful disinformational campaign? Furthermore, a few days ago we got another update right before Vladimir Putin visited the headquarters of Special Military Operation in Rostov-on-Don, where he had meeting with head of Russian army, of head of special operation Gerasimov, had the headquarters. He had the meeting with him. Right before this event, some Russian sources started publishing the information that the Russian special forces FSB asked Putin to dismiss Gerasimov and Shoigu one more time from their positions, to announce massive mobilization and to start massive war against Ukraine. So a lot of disinformations during these days, and probably, and the most important, that all these small details is the part of Russian special operation. And basically the Russians are trying to hide the main direction of their attack. Obviously, they're trying to hide, and they're trying to change the focus of people to some not necessary and the secondary directions, because it is a lot of chances that somebody can mention and see the real purpose of the goals of the Russian forces, and of course to discuss them on some evening update of military situation on the ground or else. And currently the Russians are trying to stretch to change the focus of people, but currently, as I understand, something big is going to happen from the Russian side. And as I told you, the same level of disinformation we saw exactly a year and a half ago. Before the beginning of the special military operation, we saw almost the same level of disinformation from the Russian side. And we know how the previous disinformation campaign from the Russian side ended. That disinformation campaign ended with the beginning of the special military operation. And currently I expect that soon something very important and big is going to happen from the Russian side. For now, we don't know and we can't project this situation, but obviously something is going to happen. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainians lost another 160 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles. As we discussed, the bridges, a lot of pontoon bridges were destroyed along the Skol River with one purpose, of course, to slow down and reduce the Ukrainian possibilities. Also, there was a video of another Lancet strike. As a result of that strike, the Ukrainians lost another position, probably some howitzer that the Ukrainians were trying to hide along the forest lines. So we see the fierce clashes. Furthermore, when talking about the Ukrainians, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians made their own counter-offensive operation in the direction of Novosilovskaya. The Ukrainians were attacking their movement, started their movement somewhere in the vicinity of Stelimakhovka. Probably then they crossed Zherebets River somewhere in this area, continued their movements along the forest lines, and in this direction they were trying to attack the southern part of Novosilovsk. The Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian movements, and after that the Russians started bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions. The Ukrainians tank fist, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost significant number of armored vehicles, tanks. So basically this is probably a third or fourth failed attempt from the Ukrainian side to counterattack. Almost every single day we see failed attempts to attack in the vicinity of Rabotina. Then we got failed attack in the vicinity of Bakhmut, and now we see another failed attack in the vicinity of Novosilovskaya. And the question is whether it's true or maybe this is a fake, another disinformation from the Russian side. Because as we discussed in the previous video, for example, some very reliable Russian source with subscribers around of 1 million subscribers published the video of tank battle that we discussed over the internet that took place a year ago. And all these situations took place almost at the same time. So the Russians are planning something, and we will be able to understand this just when the time comes and the Russians start acting. But believe me, as I understand, we don't need to wait for a very long time. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.